Welcome to the second episode in a Legendarium series about the English Civil War. In this installment, A Little God on Earth, we will talk about how the Stuart idea of monarchy led to an ongoing fight over taxes between King Charles I of England and his subjects. The king also angered Puritan Englishmen because of the heavy-handed leadership of his Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud. King Charles had grown weary of Parliament during the early years of his reign, with their endless shouting about the rights of Parliament and how taxation without representation was an abomination. So, beginning in 1629, he simply never summoned Parliament again. For the next 11 years, he effectively governed England and Scotland as an absolute monarch, in the skin of Cardinal Richelieu in France or Tsar Mikhail in Russia. Of course, without Parliament, he had no way to levy taxes, at least legally. So King Charles had to spend less and get a lot more imaginative in getting what he had. So he began imposing fines upon men who were eligible for knighthood but chose not to become knights. He also pawned the royal jewels and extended ship money, the tax that financed the navy, from being imposed only in coastal towns to the entire country, which most of the country, not surprisingly, was not very happy about. King Charles used this money to enshrine the Stuart monarchy and remind everyone that he viewed kings as divine, as little gods on earth. In 1636, he commissioned the painter Peter Paul Rubens to create 3 paintings to honor his father, King James I. They reminded everyone that Charles saw the monarchy as something divine. The first portrayed James as the bringer of peace and plenty to the British Isles. The second showed the angels lifting James up to heaven to become a god. The third portrayed James as Solomon, accepting the 2 kings of England and Scotland. Finally, he hoisted them to the roof of the banqueting house of Whitehall Palace in London. Charles remodeled it in the European style, with classical-style columns and tall windows that flooded the banqueting house with light. They reminded everyone that they were in the presence of majesty and power. And with England apparently quiet, officials collecting his taxes and enforcing his laws, Charles must have assumed that his absolute monarchy was very much secure. However, the men who thundered against the evils of taxation without Parliament's consent in 1625 felt the same way in 1635, and they had the printing press to share their opinion with everyone. Pamphlets and woodcuts began appearing in every store of England and Scotland, thundering against the evils of taxation without Parliament's consent. John Hampden of Buckinghamshire was the sort of man who should have been a supporter of King Charles. He was one of the most prominent members of the Shire gentry, a major landowner. Yet one of his friends, John Eliot, had been imprisoned after the parliaments of the 1620s. John Hampden took it upon himself to look after Eliot's children, his estate, and in time he took up his cause against ship money. King Charles had outraged most of the country by taking ship money, which was a tax imposed on coastal towns to finance the navy, and imposed it upon the entire country. In John Hampden's eyes, this was an abomination, and he filed suit against King Charles' wicked tax in the courts. And while Hampden ultimately lost his case, it was followed eagerly by readers who read the court papers and editorials which supported Hampden and Eliot. These woodcuts and pamphlets also portrayed the king's taxmen as nothing less than agents of the devil. Yet King Charles did not stop with annoying the tax revolters. He also annoyed the Puritans. King Charles' Reformation hadn't gone far enough from the Puritans, who wanted to cleanse England of what they saw as Catholic influence. The Puritans saw life as a war against Satan, sin, and Catholicism. During King Charles' reign, the 30 Years' War raged in the continent, with Protestant blood spilling in rivers. The Puritans saw it as an abomination that King Charles failed to go to war against the Habsburgs, who were causing so many Protestant deaths. Worst of all, they saw a Church of England that was still filled with bishops who dared to lecture the Puritans that the Reformation had gone far enough and that they should leave the Bible reading and the preaching to bishops and priests. The Puritans only saw the Church of England as filled with worthless baubles that were trying to dazzle the superstitious and foolish into believing that they had true faith. So the Puritans took it upon themselves to rebel against King Charles' religious order. They broke into the churches and they threw the chalices into the mud. They smashed apart the altars. They ripped off the priests' vestments and they burned the paintings in an effort to cleanse the church of what they saw as impurities. It's worth noting that the Puritans were always a minority. They tended to have most of their following among the artisans and merchants, mostly in English towns, which then only held a small percentage of the population. Yet the Puritans did not feel threatened by the smallness of their numbers. Indeed, they reveled in being the minority. After all, wasn't the party of God, the party of redemption, supposed to be in the minority? They didn't need numbers because they believed they had God on their side. And they saw the agent of Satan as Archbishop William Laud. Appointing William Laud to the Archbishopric of Canterbury must rank as King Charles' greatest blunder. Most Protestants were not prepared to go as far as the Puritans wanted. If King Charles had presented himself as the defender of moderate Protestantism against both Catholicism and extreme Puritanism, then he might have won over a majority of the country. Yet William Laud's quasi-Catholicism reminded far too many people of Rome, and made the Protestant middle of the country see King Charles, not the Puritans, as the real enemy. While the Puritans despised William Laud as being a despot, Laud actually saw the Puritans themselves as the authoritarians. Laud decided that what the common people needed was comfort and color and beauty. He wanted them to be able to hold the chalice, to see the communion loaf and the wine behind the railing, where both would be kept safe from the dogs. They wanted to see the Savior on the cross. At least that is what Laud decided that the common people wanted to see. And Laud's great failing was that he did not present his quasi-Catholic program as being an option, but an order. And for those who dared to disobey orders, he had the ecclesiastical court ready. Those who appeared before William Laud's court and failed to win their case could easily find their ears chopped off. And the Puritans who went before Laud's court and walked out missing their ears became national celebrities as Protestant woodcuts and pamphlets celebrated their courage in the face of William Laud's cruelty. Yet, ironically, it was King Charles' homeland of Scotland, where he'd been born in the year 1600, that became the seedbed of the rebellion. While most of England was governed by the Anglican Church, Scotland was Presbyterian. In England, change had come slowly and from the top down, which resulted in a church that was Catholic in its ritual, but Protestant in its doctrine. On the other hand, in Scotland, the conversion from Catholicism to Protestantism came in great bursts of enthusiasm, in which huge crowds of people from across shires gathered around charismatic preachers who thundered against the corruption of the existing order and converted huge numbers of ordinary people who made their own church the Presbyterian KIRK. In a final display of his profound ignorance about the land he ruled, King Charles decided to impose the Book of Common Prayer written in the time of Queen Elizabeth upon the Scottish Presbyterian KIRK. He saw it as a step in creating religious and political unity within his kingdom. Yet he made one critical error. The Book of Common Prayer was supposed to go throughout Scotland in 1637. Yet there was a delay in the printing, and the Calvinist preachers across Scotland used that brief respite to organize a response. And when they rose, their battle cry, it would be so thunderous that not even a little God on earth would be able to ignore it. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.